Hi, Ian. How's it
Morning,
going?
Elena. Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. I'm really excited about our today's webinar. So, let me say a couple of words about you. Ian is a digital marketing marketer for 25 years. He does all the marketing things, particularly search engine optimization and content. He has worked with big brands and little ones, B2B and B2C. He started, built, and sold Portent, the most excellent digital agency in Seattle. And what I like the most, he does a happy dance when he's hired to handle all the marketing stuff. I've read that on his site. It sounds so great to me. I sometimes do the same. So, Ian, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your experience and today's topic? Guys, enjoy the topic and presentation. So, Ian, here you are.
Hey, everybody. If you've ever seen me dance, you'd know it's not that exciting. Uh, Thanks, Elena, for introducing me. I am Ian Lurie. I should tell you that I need to update my bio because at this point I've been in digital marketing for 27, 28 years. When it hits 30, I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. Um, Data visualization is something that I've had my hands in from the very early days at Portent. Because what I discovered was as you go through projects and everything's moving up and to the right, search traffic's going up, profits are going up, revenue's going up, all the right things. We in the marketing department or at the agency can get a little complacent and we assume that everybody knows how well we're doing. And then one day, surprise, we get fired. And we get fired even though we've provided all the data and we are succeeding for the client and all these things are working. And usually when we get fired, we've provided all the data, but it hasn't been received. There's somebody on the client side, and we've probably all been through this, who's saying, well, we'd probably be succeeding without Ian. All these things that are happening, they probably happen anyway. So I think we should cut costs and get rid of the agency or fire Ian if you're in-house or whatever, and you end up fired. And it's very frustrating. And I understand that because it happened to me a lot in the 25 years I ran Portent. Um, and we rarely had any great insight into it. But one thing I figured out is you're dumping all the data on this client and they can't interpret it because it's not about the data, right? It's about the story the data is telling. And if you're providing dashboards to your clients that look the same when they're upside down, sideways, or forwards, and the correct and right to left or left to right, depending on where you are in the world, I guess, something's wrong, right? And being right doesn't matter if no one knows what the hell you're saying. That's just the way it works. And it's frustrating and it's difficult, but if no one understands your data, it's just ink on a page, virtual or otherwise. It's worthless. It just sits there and and I'm not saying our clients are capybara, although I'll tell you, capybara to me are one of the ideal creatures walking the earth. So for me to say compare clients and bosses to capybara actually is a huge compliment, but I would understand why some people might not want to be compared to a 150-pound rodent. I get it. Just understand, for me, this is a huge compliment if I think that you are similar to a capybara. The problem here is that we just suck at data visualization and we need to get better at it. We have to. And even now, 2 decades, 3 decades into digital marketing, we are still terrible at data visualization. I get reports all the time that are just screen captures of Google Analytics or their Excel spreadsheets with, a little tiny chart that I can't interpret or something like that. So I put this presentation together and I actually created this presentation years ago. This is something that's evolved over the years. And if you've seen me present before, some of this is going to look familiar, but most of it won't. And the story behind it has changed a little bit. One thing that has not changed is I have stolen a lot of this from lots of really fantastic data visualization experts. If you don't know who Edward Tufte is, learn who he is. His books are ridiculously expensive. They are still worth it. Not only will they teach you a ton, but they're just gorgeous books. Like, you can put these on your coffee table. no doubt. And by the way, I don't get a commission or anything. I don't even know Edward Tufte. I'm just telling you, he is the guy who created the modern science of great data visualization. Two other books I strongly recommend, and writers, and you should read everything they write everywhere. Stephen Few or Stephen Few, I don't know how to pronounce his name. And I don't have her whole name in front of me, but I do have her book actually right here because I just got it. Cole Nussbaumer Affleck. I don't know if you can see that or not. She wrote a book called Storytelling with Data. Again, I have no connection with these people. I am not, this is not a paid endorsement or an endorsement that will be paid in beer or anything like that. These are just amazing books. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about here is me distilling what I have learned in those books. I'm also a complete fraud. I have no training in statistics. I have no training in math. I'm a history major. I have a law degree, and my design skills are somewhat worse than my ability to dance, which, by the way, I'm such a bad dancer that I got a pass at our own wedding. I did the initial walk on dance, and after that, my wife was like, "It's okay, and if you don't want to dance, no one really wants to be subjected to it anyway. So we can all just go around and chat with everybody." That's how bad a dancer I am. That's how bad a designer I am. Everything you see in here is based on these basic rules. And the reason I'm saying all this stuff is not just to be funny, but to make it clear, if I can do this, you can do this. There is not some natural gift necessary for good data visualization. What's necessary is that you take certain rules and that you understand how your audience is interpreting data. So before I get into the tools, uh, a very quick course, and bear with me here, just work your way through this. A very quick survey in how our brains work. 2 weeks ago was my birthday, and I got home after my birthday trip and decided to do some yard work and promptly stepped in a wasp's nest and got attacked by a bazillion wasps. Second time this has happened to me in my life. Um, and one thing it got me thinking about, not really, but it sort of did, is how my brain responded to that. And the first part of my brain, the little teeny part of your brain that's still all the way back from when we were lizards, just has one response, right? It just responds and says, "Oh my God, I'm being attacked by wasps." Right? These nasty, creepy, crawly things have come out of the ground and are trying to eat me. Did you know that wasps are carnivorous and they actually try to eat you? Yeah, that's not okay in my yard, but that's actually what they were doing. So that first response is just one word, right? It's just a primal scream, the kind of sound that, we made when we were literally lizards getting stepped on by bigger lizards. The next reaction is interpretation. And that is, oh, okay, these are wasps. There are probably more of them, and they're probably coming out of a nest that I have stepped on. Perhaps I should remove myself from here, right? That's the interpretation and that initial response. Then comes planning. So you're inside, you're icing your feet, which just got stung about 10 times. And you're thinking, okay, something just tried to eat me in my own yard. I'm going to murder all of them. What's the best way to do it? Well, it turns out pouring ice down their burrow and filling it with dirt is the best way to do it. And by the way, I am a total environmentalist. Like, I cry when I step on a snail, but if you try to eat me in my own yard, it's on. You're dead. That's it. It's over. So this is planning, right? So you've got these 3 steps you need if you're going to create successful data visualization to organize your data like this. So it turns out me being attacked by wasps has some real practical applications here. Hopefully you stuck your way through this and it makes sense. Now what I'm gonna do is walk through those 3 big steps, right? And the first step is instant clarity. It's dealing with the lizard brain and making sure that the moment I look at the data, I engage with it. And what you don't do is scare me away. I will spend most of this presentation talking about this instant clarity, about how it is that we ensure that you don't scare your audience away. Because if you do, that's it. It's over. Nothing else you do will matter. On the other hand, if you get it right, you just bought yourself a pass to tell a really good, complex story about your data. So, what's the first instinct for a lot of us? It's to hand over a spreadsheet, right? But spreadsheets are all about mental tasks. And these are the rules that I've stolen from Tufte and Stephen Few, by the way. The first thing we have to do is reduce mental tasks. And a spreadsheet has a lot of mental tasks. right? I have to do a lot of things to interpret this data. First, I have to figure out where the heading is, right? Where's the header on this page? Then I have to figure out what all the columns are called. Then I have to find the particular row of data that I want. Then I have to walk my eyes across that row of data, looking at each number, moving back up to the headings, making sure that I understand what those headings are, and then interpreting the data that I'm looking at. This is well over 10 mental tasks, right? If you hand this table, and I don't care if your client begs for the table, right? They say, oh, we want this raw data. Please get us this raw data. Doesn't matter. You will scare them off every single time. And what they'll say is, okay, I'll take a look at it later, which usually means never, which means you're going to get to that point where you get complacent because you think they know that you're succeeding and they don't, because you're just not able to tell the story. And this is not because your clients are not smart. These are very intelligent people. It's because they are doing a million things at once and they don't spend every day in your data. They have maybe 10 minutes to understand what they are seeing. You can reduce the mental tasks, right? Even in a table, I can reduce mental tasks. So I can highlight a row, highlight a column, and then make sure that there's a particular number that is also highlighted. So this is the number I care about, this $835.79. So now maybe there's 4 mental tasks. There's still no ability to interpret this. I still have to go up and down the column. I still have to go up and down across all the rows. I have to really understand why this number matters. So this is still pretty scary. This is still hard for me to process. On the other hand, if I take this data and I pop it into a line chart, and I know this is really obvious, again, bear with me. This is maybe 2 mental tasks, right? And in fact, it's really 1. I look at it, I see the trend line, and I'm done. Things are going in the direction I want. Great. I can figure it out. Now I can move on to the next step. This isn't telling me the whole story, right? This isn't telling me everything I need to know. But this is pointing out to me that there's a trend here. And then if I want to perform 2 mental tasks, I see that something went wrong on the 7th or 6th of January, right? And then I can go back, reinterpret this, and go over my data. The next step is maximizing the ratio of data to ink. And this doesn't matter if it's on a screen, it doesn't have to be real ink, obviously. This I've used this as an example when I talk about this for 15 years. The reason is it is actually loosely based on a real example. It was a different product. The graph is almost exactly the same, and the colors are very similar. So yeah, the client said, "Hey, you know what would be really cool? Let's do this in 3 dimensions, but let's also make sure that we have a symbol of the product at the top of each graph so that people who are looking understand this is about this particular product." Now, this was being presented to their shareholders who probably understand the product that they're going to be hearing about. Client was very insistent. We did it this way. These days, now that I'm older, I probably would have said, that's great, but I'm going to give you this instead. And this is going to work better. So the first thing is there's a lot of ink here that has nothing to do with the data, right? Ink that has absolutely nothing to do with the data would include the product. So we get rid of that. The ratio of data to ink improves. The other thing is don't use 3-dimensional presentation of data unless that third dimension is essential to the presentation of the data. So I get rid of that. And suddenly there's a much higher ratio of data to ink, right? Much easier to interpret. Again, bear with me. I know most of you are probably looking at this and saying, oh, okay, of course, Ian, this is obvious. What may be less obvious here is for someone like me, who's about 2/3 colorblind, I can barely see the yellow, right? Plus, primary colors in a graph can cause headaches. So one of the things I always recommend, and again, this is a tufty thing as well, uh, is use natural colors. Use a natural color palette when you are putting together your charts. And if it's a single data point, then use one color. If it's multiple, use some kind of contrast. Tim Beard has this natural color palette that I still use 10, 15, 20 years later. It is great. You can use, there are other natural palettes out there. This is the one I've used forever. Usually I pick one set here and I use that. And you might increase contrast, but you can see already using that natural color palette how much easier that has made this to interpret, right? So again, go back to the lizard brain. What are you seeing now? Well, I just went from a horrifying table to a horrifying three-dimensional chart to a two-dimensional chart with colors I couldn't interpret to a two-dimensional chart that uses natural colors. I've done all that. The next step is to actually remove ink that is not directly communicating data. This is a little different from data to ink ratio because even on this, there's still a lot of ink that is not necessary to tell people what I need to understand about the data. These are more typical features of a graph, of a chart, but they're a little bit less necessary. So for example, we don't need the grid. Okay. This is not complicated enough, excuse me, to require a grid. It's very easy to interpret, particularly because at this stage, we are just trying to answer the lizard brain's question, which is, what am I looking at here? You don't need the tick marks, right? So what have I just done? I've gotten rid of two collections of non-data ink that I just don't need here. The last rule is to remove redundant ink. So for example, here I have all of these dollar amounts on my y-axis. Well, that's great, but they're all even amounts. I don't need to have all those dots and zeros, so I remove those. The other thing I could do here that I didn't do, bad on me, is I could probably change this to a three-step y-axis. So it would go 0 to 600 to 1200, right? I probably don't need all those numbers on the y-axis. Anything you can do to cut back on the amount of ink that my brain has to process is going to increase the chances that you're going to make it past my lizard brain and make it all the way to the next step in the process. Another little trick that I'll use is I will create a grid using negative colors. So basically using whatever the background is. You can't do this automatically in Excel or Google Sheets. And by the way, I should have said the two tools that I'm using here are Excel and Google Sheets. I'm pretty tool agnostic. I use Data Studio, I use all sorts of things, but I wanted to make sure that these are all things you can do. I also have a Google Sheet with all these examples in it, and you'll be able to, I'll share a link to that at the end. So, but what I'll sometimes do is just place a single white line just right across the middle so that people can look at this and say, oh, okay, here's the median value. And they can very quickly orient themselves. So yeah, I got rid of the grid, but it's a little bit easier here to interpret what which numbers apply to which layer level of the bar graph. So just a quick walkthrough, quick revisiting of all this, the cleanup. Went from this to this, right? By removing non-data ink, by removing redundant data ink, by maximizing the ratio of data to ink, by basically making sure that this is something that's not going to send me running screaming from the room. Next is that instant context. So I've already had the ability to instantly process my first look at the data. Now I have to start to understand the bigger story around this data. For example, and basic rules here are get to the point, right? Answer meh, and then use small multiples, which is just a tool for doing that. And again, that's a rule I stole from Edward Tufte. So, for example, this is data that I actually used on a different campaign a long time ago, and I've changed everything so that people don't actually know what it is. So we're good. But this is data showing, uh, this is randomly generated data, but it could potentially be showing organic search clicks, right, to a site, or in this case, it's randomly generated data based on a presidential campaign, but it's a whole other story. So pretend it's organic search clicks. That's what I'm doing. And here, great. This is organic search clicks over time. It's easy for me to process. You made it past my lizard brain. I'm not freaking out, right? But I don't quite understand why I care about this. The next thing you want to do is provide some kind of reference point. some understanding of what has happened here, right? So here I'm showing that we hit a low right when the algorithm update hit. And we're showing what the average was before the update. This immediately tells me a couple of things, right? First, it tells me we actually dropped before the algorithm update. So it might not be the update that did this to us, but we are still below the average we had before that update, right? So that's just instant clarity, instant context. And by the way, how many mental tasks are there here? Maybe 3 or 4. And I'm pulling a lot of information out of that. So you can keep applying some of those rules like reduce mental tasks. For some reason, I'm getting through this really fast, probably because I can't look out at you all and see if it's making sense to you or not. So I apologize for that. The next thing is answering meh, because people will look at all this data and they may get to this point and look at it and say, okay, that's interesting, but why do I care? Right? Why is this important? With the wasps, it's important because there's probably more coming and I need to leave. Right? With the data, there's something significant here. I just don't know what it is yet. Right? Remember what I said a minute ago, where the algorithm update happened after traffic started to drop. Someone looking at this may not be able to conclude this is the next step, the next thing that we have to do. Here's another example, right? Here's revenue by month. Could be organic search, could be something else, doesn't matter. Someone looks at it and they say, well, okay, that's not a ton of growth. I mean, sure, Ian, you started working for us in June of last year, and we had great growth for a while, but over the last 3 months, it just looks like we have a lot less growth. And by the way, if you took this line chart, if you turn this into a line graph and went all the way back to July, you see really steep growth for a while, and then it flattens out. So the first thing people think is, okay, do we really care about this? Well, you might, because that growth is actually at the same rate as it was way back in June or July of last year when things were much lower. So 20 grand a month, $20,000 a month in growth looked a lot prettier. It looked a lot more exciting, but you're still growing that fast. So all I did here was add a scorecard. That's what this is actually called in Google Sheets, is a scorecard. And it just compares this month to last month and shows how much revenue increased. And the reason that matters is creating that immediate answer to why do I care? In this particular case, that could mean a lot of additional profit for this client, right? You look at it and you're like, well, okay, it's 4%, something like that. It's not that great. For this particular client, that's really strong growth. That's great. That's pure profit. And they can reinvest that in all sorts of great ways. And any kind of instant, easy to take in growth indicator like that is always a winner. Last rule, and this is directly from Tufte, and by the way, this chapter in his book is incredible, is to use small multiples. So I need to compare and contrast. And this is one way to do it, right? I can look at each channel and what happened over time for each channel. So here I can see, here's May, June, and July for PPC, SEO, email, and going out and actually just saying, please buy my product, like to everybody who walks by on the sidewalk. I don't know why you would do that, but maybe you would get someone with one of those flip signs or something. This is not bad, right? I can process this. There are more mental tasks here. If we go all the way back to the beginning, and it's a little bit messy. Like when I first look at it, I'm not sure if the different colors are different channels or if the different colors are different months or what. A better way to do it, in my opinion, is to use small multiples. Now, I do this a lot. I am heavily biased towards small multiples. Some folks don't like them. I totally understand that. You don't have to do this, but what I find is it's easier to see the contrast and the comparison between the different channels and see the performance of each channel this way than this way. So when I'm building a dashboard, and this is maybe the second drill down step, which we'll talk about in a minute, I like to use small multiples. And by the way, if you're trying to get rid of non-data ink or redundant data ink, you can get rid of the y-axis on the right-hand charts, right? Because the y-axis is the same. You can even do that with the x-axis. I'm kind of lazy, but I also don't necessarily love the way that looks. So here, what you can see though is either way, you can very quickly take in and process this information. So here's what we just did. We took context and applied it to, sorry, we took data and ensured that you could get the correct context from that data. So we went from this to this, where we're showing what happened, and then we're using small multiples to show performance over time of each channel. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Again, typical disclaimer after all these years of doing webinars, can't look at your faces, not sure if this is making sense. Hopefully it is. If not, at the end of this, you can say, Ian, this makes no sense. Please do it all again. Or Ian, please never talk to me about this again. So the third step, this is not me. I wish I looked that cool. About my physique, that's about how I look, but you want to enable easy drill down. So now that you have made it past that first processing, that first, instant clarity, and you understand the context, you understand the message, right? There are wasps coming out of the ground. We have seen good growth. We saw a big drop in organic traffic, whatever it means. Now I need to be able to start planning. What that means is I have to be able to drill deeper into the data. And it's really important that you do provide that drill down, because once you have made it past those first two steps, people will want more. Particularly if, say, and I'm sure you've all been through this, you present that initial report to leadership, right? And they see the graph that goes up and to the right, and they're very excited. And then they say, okay, can I see more? Or they take it and they hand it to an analyst on their team, or it gets passed around to other teams. They want more detail. They have a little bit more time to look at the data. You need to be able to provide that drill down. So a few rules that apply here. First one is rule of consistency. I see a lot of people get cute where they will have small multiples and they'll change the axes so that it looks like maybe email and begging are performing really well. But if you look here, what have they really done? They changed the scale on those two graphs. You can do that, okay, if you really have to. The problem with it is it does create a false sense that all of these channels perform equally well, and they don't, right? Email just isn't generating as much revenue for whatever reason. So you want to have the same y-axis across all of these charts. If it's completely invisible, if you can't see anything, I'll show you a couple of things you can do there in a moment, but don't get cute. One thing to do is to create some kind of emphasis of the difference. Again, I'm not a designer. This is actually not what I did for this particular client. What I actually did is I just separated these on the page physically, and then annotated each one so that people would look at it and just say, oh, okay, PPC and SEO are one row, and we're talking about it. And then here's email and going out and pleading for sales, and it worked differently. Another way to do it is the dual axis line graph. And I do use this all the time. Um, it can add mental tasks, but it's a very valuable tool for consistently comparing and contrasting data, because you can show two different pieces of trending data at the same time. I'm really sorry, guys. When I rehearsed this was like an hour, and it's going to be more like 30, 35 minutes. Um, I'll be free for lots of Q&A at the end. But anyway, uh, the next thing is use the tools. So there's all these subtle little things you can do. Now that people are doing drill down, there's all these little tricks and tools built into Google Sheets and Excel that you can use. So trend lines, definitely, right? And if you don't know how to add a trend line to a graph, first thing is, what a trend line does is it takes the average performance of data over time, right? And just shows where things are going, literally shows the trend. And Google Sheets and Excel, this is the only place I actually provide sort of direct step by step, just because this is kind of subtle, particularly in Google Sheets. But if you go to the chart editor in Google Sheets and customize, scroll down, check the box for trend line, you'll get a trend line. In Excel, you right click on the data point. So on the chart or on the line graph or whatever, you click add trend line and it adds it for you. The only problem with the trend line is it doesn't account for bumps. So if you look at this graph, right, there's some huge peaks and drops. And it's one reason that the trend line is not necessarily all that impressive. Even though there is pretty steep growth towards the end, something happened in mid April or so that really messed up our data. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, don't know. So what you can do instead is a rolling or moving average. And what a rolling or moving average does, same thing, it's just different terms for the same thing, is it takes the last n number of days or data points and averages them. And instead of showing you day by day, shows you the average over time. So this flattens things out a little bit. And yeah, the huge spike in April is still there, but it's a bit easier to look past it and get a sense of, oh, okay, data was pretty even, and now it's starting to trend upwards again. And the way you use this in Google Sheets and Excel, again, same step, right? Doing the trend line, but then you set moving average, or you set moving average as you're customizing and adding the trend line, or once you've added the trend line in Excel, right click, change it to moving average. You see the period there. That's right now I'm averaging the last 2 days or data points. You can set it to the last 7, the last 30. Really, if I were going to fix this, I would set it to the last probably 2 weeks. There is one other tool that I wasn't going to talk about, but I may as well briefly. There's something called trim mean. It's a function, and you can tell your spread, whether it's Google Sheets or Excel, remove outliers, right? So anything that gets too far from the mean, so for example, here around 1400, anything that gets too far from 1400, just remove it from the trend line, from whatever it is I'm using. So you could say anything that's not within 20% of the mean, trim it down, have it closer to 20% of the mean. Um, Obviously, that can be problematic. I'm not enough of a statistician or a math person to do that regularly, but I do sometimes use it. Last thing, kind of bonus round, still worth talking about. Uh, Format tables. You really want to make sure that you do, for that last step of drill down, people do still want to look at your tables. You need to format them. And people neglect this. Like they use Calibri as their font or whatever the default font is. They, don't look at alignment. They don't look at spacing. And it's really hard to read. So here, think about the number of mental tasks and the fact that every mental task is equally difficult, where I have to process columns, process rows, look at my data, trace across, just figure out what the heck I'm looking at. This is a little bit better, right? I'm just using some slight contrast, so it's easier for me to track across rows and it's easier for me to see that there's a heading row. The problem is there's still a lot of ink here, and you can apply the same rules. There's a lot of non-data ink. There's a lot of redundant data ink. There's a lot of things here that I have to process and I don't need to. So you can get this closer to meeting the demands of that lizard brain. This is even better, right? Because now I'm aligning things, and I do usually left align dates, right align other numbers. And you can see what it does is it just makes it a little bit easier for you to process each row. Not a big deal, right? But I'm still using Calibri or Arial or whatever the default font is. And the problem with those fonts is they're not monospaced. So sometimes if you're using decimal numbers or date numbers, it's a little bit harder to read. So here I'm using a monospaced font. I think it's Consulus. And it's not as pretty, but if you compare it, it's a little bit easier to process, right? Because it's just I'm using the ink more wisely. The next thing is, uh, if I'm most concerned about data week over week, I may as well highlight the weeks, right? So what did I do here? Well, I'm highlighting weeks with contrasting color. I also, if you look here, increase spacing between my rows, right? And I got rid of the contrasting color at the top for the heading. So this is just reduced non-data ink for me and made it easier to read. And then if you want to hit 11 out of 10, highlight the week of data that you really care about, whatever it is. Right here, I picked one and I just highlighted it for you as an example. Again, these are all in the Google Sheet with all the examples. So here's how the drill down works, right? I take a look at this and I say, okay, this is really interesting. I want to take a look at organic performance or paid performance or whatever. I do a lot of organic search. That's why I go there. I look and I think, okay, in early March, there was a peak. Now I know what happened in May. I know what happened in early and mid-May, but if you look in early March, there's a smaller peak. I don't know exactly what that was. I would love to understand it. So I started here, moved to here. I'm looking at the more detailed information. And then I go straight to my table and I can see exactly what the data point is, what the amount of data is, and I can start asking more questions. There is nothing subtle about this. Maybe that's why I got through this so fast. Um, this is not some deep philosophical or existential problem. What this is following certain basic rules. Remember at the beginning when I said, if I can do this, anybody can? Um, that's basically what I'm saying. You need to follow these rules, right? Provide instant clarity, reduce mental tasks, maximize the data to ink ratio, use natural colors, remove non-data ink, remove redundant ink. That's the lizard brain. Getting past the gorilla brain, again, gorillas are cool. I'm not saying anything bad about gorillas here. Set that instant context, right? Get to the point. Explain to me why I'm looking at this. Answer why it's important and use small multiples so it's easier for me to see the answer as to why it is important. Then enable drill down, right? We've gotten all the way to my nerd brain now. My frontal lobe is just trying to is responding to this more deeply and is telling the rest of my brain, okay, it's time to really get to work here. What do I need to know? Follow those rules. You will always provide better data visualization. You'll always tell better stories and you will get fired less often. I'm not going to say you never get fired, but you get fired less often. These are the resources. Again, the links are on my blog, and I'm pretty sure, completely sure that Serpstat is going to also provide these slides to you. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Jan. So I really found the presentation extremely useful and engaging. It was really, really interesting. So it's time for the QA session. So we have several questions from the emails, and I see a few questions in the chat. Let's start with the questions from emails. So the most questions about the tools. So what are the best data visualization tools you can recommend to make the job easier and more efficient? What would you say?
I would start with Excel or Google Sheets. And Excel is better at this than Google Sheets. It's just got better formatting tools. After that, I would say Google Data Studio, except to be honest, making data look good in Google Data Studio, in my experience, is very difficult. It's much more difficult than Excel. After that, you can look at Tableau software. There's all sorts of tools out there that are data analysis tools that may or may not make visualization easier, but I would start with Excel. If you can tell me a little bit more about what you mean by making it easier, I might be able to provide more information and pick a better tool, but Excel is the simplest and Google Sheets is the second simplest.
Okay, and on the other hand, which tools for data visualization wouldn't you recommend for a newbie? So the Google Data Studio or?
Google Data Studio is okay. It is more work when you get started. Google Data Studio is designed to create dashboards that update themselves. That's really a big part of what it does, and do more complex visualizations with more complex data. So I actually, you can use it. What I would recommend is you never go directly to a tool like, say, SQL Server or BigQuery. Don't use Python to generate your charts and your graphs. Just don't do that. Feed your data into something like Excel or Google Sheets or even Google Data Studio. Don't try to use built-in tools, particularly for Python, because they generate some pretty ugly charts. You can look at a tool called D3, which is a JavaScript library. I don't recommend it for report data visualization because it is you have to learn a lot. The overhead, there's a big learning curve. So I would avoid D3 unless you are a JavaScript developer or you really, really want to learn something new.
Okay, thank you for the answer. So let's turn to the questions from the chat. I see several. The question from Greg, I'm sorry if I pronounce wrong. Do you use on an additions for sheets?
Not for data visualization. I do use a couple of search-related plugins that help me pull data from Google Search Console, things like that, but I don't use anything for visualization. Everything I presented here is using standard Google Sheets tools. And Craig, I can send you those pictures. They're all from my stock photos. So if you use them, I'll probably get sued or something. But personal use is fine. You want to do some posters or something, go for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. And a question from Ellen. Ian, were there ever reports that were difficult to create for you? Maybe a lot of data or something else?
Yes. So a lot of data. Anytime I'm dealing with a lot of data, it can be very difficult. Like if I'm dealing with 3 or 4 years worth of daily numbers, that's very difficult. Anytime I'm trying to show data that's time shifted, this is really important. If you have something that's a leading or trailing indicator, so say that algorithm update I showed you where traffic started to drop before the algorithm update, or where increased organic traffic didn't lead to increased sales, but it did 2 weeks later because the sales cycle for our product is very long. That kind of time shifted data where something's a leading indicator, where something happening means something good will happen much later on. That's a real challenge. And I didn't talk about that in this presentation, but learning to do time shifted visualizations is very, very important to deal with that. The last one that's really difficult is when the client's looking over your shoulder, right? When they're looking and saying, can you do it this way? Can you do it that way? Can you do it this way? And what I have found is that just answer their questions. And then when they're not there, do it the way you want to do it and show it to them. And if they don't like it more, you have to do it their way. But most of the time what I've found is they do like whatever visualization I've created more than the one that they've made me create.
Yeah, thank you. And the next question from Roy. Is there a job data visualizer? And if so, how much can one earn?
There's data analyst. I don't know about someone who just does data visualization. There might be. There's people for like the New York Times that do special data presentations. I have no idea what they earn. I could tell you what we paid at Portent, but we should probably talk about that offline. It's probably not okay for me to be throwing that out there since Portent is still around and is still hiring people. But usually it's some kind of data analyst who gets good at data visualization. There's no one that, as far as I know, who just does the visualization.
Okay. So the next question from Nick, do your clients like to see keyword position tracking reports?
Yes, they do. And yes, I fight them constantly. What I try to get, I don't like showing keyword position tracking because this is separate from this whole presentation, but it rarely has much to do with organic search performance because you're just tracking a few keywords and the long tail is so much more important in most cases. When I do have to present it, I'll present it using something like share of voice, or I'll present it using something that just shows, that is some kind of basic scrape data that shows me all of the rankings for which I have appeared. But I will always push clients instead to look at overall organic search and business performance as is so sales, whatever, from organic search.
Okay, great. Thank you. And one more question. Question from Erin. Have people on your team made terrible reports? How do you react to this?
How I mentioned the presentation I give about running an agency. People providing reports that are not, that don't explain a lot. This is a process that people have to learn, and it's a tough one because it's not some natural talent, right? You just have to learn the rules. So if people presented me with reports that didn't communicate, that weren't great, or I just looked at them and kind of cringed, most of the time, we'd sit down and go through it step by step. And I'd say, okay, I would do this and this. But what we tried to do a lot is provide examples and say, get as close to this as you can. If it doesn't look like this, we should talk and I'll help you get it set up correctly. And then of course, once we had a whole analytics team, they could sit down with team members. And then once, we had a few people who knew how to do it, they could do it as well. But if an analyst if someone on my team provides me with a terrible report, I'm going to sit down with them and go over it with them. If we do that 5 or 6 times and it's still not progressing, there's a very different conversation to be had. And that's probably outside the scope of this. So.
Thank you. It's inspiring. One more question has been added. So from Ekaterina, hello, thanks for your presentation. What was the most surprising result you got only after the visualization step? Are data evident to you before visualization because of your experience?
I'm going to answer those in reverse. Yes, sometimes there's data that's evident to me because of my experience. That's really bad because I will start interpreting the data the way I think it should be interpreted and to communicate the message I think it should communicate instead of what the data actually says, which gets me to the surprising result that I'll sometimes get. The most surprising result I've ever gotten was actually the chart I showed you where the algorithm update was not responsible for the drop in traffic, right? Your first instinct when you see a steep drop like that as an SEO is, oh yeah, clearly algorithm update or penalty, even if there aren't penalties anymore, but something just happened to trigger that. In this case, when we looked, it did not do it. It was not responsible for it. There was a whole different problem. It had nothing to do with the algorithm update. That was one of the most surprising results I ever got. And it was a really good thing that I looked and really dug into it before I went to the client, because once a client hears an algorithm update is to blame, it's a very different thought process for them. And in fact, if you talk about the lizard brain, that's where the lizard brain reacts and they no longer process any more data, right? We've been hit by an algorithm update. What do we do? As opposed to, oh, here's some specific things that changed in the economy that caused our traffic to drop.
Yeah. Great. So there is one more question about the tools. Maybe do you use anything other than Google Analytics and GSC, Google Search Console, to capture your data?
So we're often pulling data, or I am often pulling data in from many sources. So revenue could be Google Analytics, but generally I like to capture it directly from whatever the store is as well. Sometimes there's fulfillment data. There can be data about call centers and call interception and how many people are responding to online chat and what they're doing and whether purchases are happening after that. And what I'll usually do is pull all that into something like BigQuery or Excel if it's not too much data, and use queries to tie it all together basically into one gigantic spreadsheet and then process it that way. There was a question from Ellen, I think. I may have mispronounced her name just before. If you have a data analyst on your team, then you do not need a person who visualizes reports. Hopefully the data analyst is good at that. That's a skill I look for in a data analyst, and in any analyst actually. So.
Okay, thank you. And one more question from me. how would you describe the future of data visualization regarding to the marketers? Will it be the necessary skill for them, and maybe regarding to the tools? How will they be evolving maybe?
It's an absolutely essential skill for marketers. It will only become more important because we've gotten out of the mode where digital marketing has matured a lot, and we're no longer in a place where people will go to a digital marketer, say, go do this. I don't want to know how, just please go do it. The black box is gone. They're going to want to see what you're doing, how, and whether it's performing, which means you need to be able to tell that story really accurately and effectively. So it's only going to become more important. The tools are evolving because they're getting a little bit better at generating visualizations that stick to these rules. The people who create tools like Excel and Tableau and Google Data Studio, hopefully they're reading Tufte's book as well, and they're starting to figure out there's important things to do to make this, to automate the generation. And I don't want to talk about artificial intelligence. It drives me crazy when people make that the thing. But I do think there will be better and better automation and automatic generation of good, easily consumed data visualization.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Jan, I appreciate you taking the time to share your Tuesday with us. It was a pleasure to listen to your presentation, which was rich in examples and personal experiences. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I can say without a doubt that it was a great event. So I appreciate you guys watching, asking questions, and being here with us. It's been a productive day, in my opinion. I really enjoyed this. Cheers. Have a great day, Jan. Have a great day, guys. And let's meet again at the Serpstat chats and future webinars. So see you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.